Star Wars 7x7 episode 3121. Faster is the title of episode 4 of The Bad Batch, and we've got our typical 7 takeaway breakdown happening here today. This one will go a little bit quicker than the usual ones. Punch it! Hey Rebel Riser, I'm Alan Voivod and this is Star Wars 7x7, your daily dose of Star Wars joy, and thank you so much for joining me for it. So no pun intended when I said this episode would probably go quicker. It just so happens the Bad Batch episode is titled Faster, and this is a one-off episode, so our first takeaway will be about the notion of filler episodes or one-off episodes. I know that this term is used in sort of a derogatory fashion, as in, don't give us filler episodes, give us episodes that advance a larger story arc, some massive story that's being told across the season or something like that. I had to say that I get it to some degree, and I kind of felt that way, I guess, particularly with, say, like the X-Files, if you remember that TV show when they had the Monster of the Week episodes and the Mythology episodes, right? So that's kind of when I particularly felt the difference between those two. But really, these quote-unquote filler episodes can and do serve a purpose, and we're going to touch on some of those elements as we work through the takeaways. So the second takeaway is essentially the plot of the episode itself overall. One of the things that we've been talking about in previous episodes of The Bad Batch, or about previous episodes of The Bad Batch, if you will, is the fact that they are giving us different combinations of the batch. Individual characters are being grouped together in new and unique ways, so we get to see different dynamics playing out. In this particular episode, Hunter and Echo don't even appear. They are referenced near the beginning as being off with shipments of Nerf nuggets, so we get Tech and Wrecker and Omega along with Sid on this episode, accompanying her to the Safatomo Speedway. Sid thinks she's about to win a ton of money with this new droid racer she has, but there's somebody else who knows her from the quote-unquote old days named Malegi who manages to get her into a bad spot, and the batch has to rescue her from it. And Tech notes that this is not the first time that they've had to help Sid out with dealings that she has with, as he puts it, people of questionable integrity, and he identifies this as a problematic pattern. This is one of those things that I think is particularly relevant to advancing the overarching arc of storytelling along. It's a very subtle moment, but I think it's one that's going to play into the larger conversations about what the Bad Batch is doing with their lives and deciding to make a difference later on. For a third takeaway, let's talk briefly about what she's betting on, which is something called riot racing. And this is similar apparently to pod racing, except it's more of an anything goes kind of situation. I guess steel claws and spinning laser cutters are perfectly legal in this race, although they only do it in the tunnels. So they seems like maybe they want to keep it under wraps a little bit. I don't know. It's one of those worst kept secret situations and seems a little bit nastier than pod racing. Yes, Sebulba certainly played some dirty tricks on the people that he raced against in the Phantom Menace, but for the most part, it was just banging and crashing. It wasn't lasers and laser cutters and claws and weapons and requiring shields for these racers. Yeah, this is pretty fun stuff, and it harkens back to the Phantom Menace. Of course, I'm bringing it up as I talk about it, but that was really fun, and I enjoyed the racing aspect of it a lot. And speaking of the racing, the fourth takeaway for you, all of those racers that get named, very similar vibe to the Phantom Menace in that regard, and I will tell you, I looked up every single one of those racers, and they are all appearing for the first time. As far as anybody knows, they're not connected to anybody else, according to Wikipedia references. The fine folks that support that whole initiative have already added character names and stuff. It's really amazing, just fantastic work that they do. But no, none of them are anybody that you've met before. However, there is seemingly a reference to Mark Hamill's character in the old Flash TV series in the 90s. There's a character that's called Flash Ractor, and his nickname is the Trickster. That, of course, would be the character that Mark Hamill played on that old Flash series back in the day. And he came back to play that role in the CW version of The Flash. So that was a fun Easter egg. For a fifth takeaway, here's another thing that I think lends itself to the overall arc of the season. So Malegi has a conversation with Sid about the old days, and Sid insists that she has changed and doesn't want to drink with him to that. And he replies that, they're hustlers and they don't change, and that pretty soon the outcasts, as he refers to Tech and Wrecker and Omega, are going to find out who the real Sid is. And Sid says, maybe I'll surprise you. But then later on in the episode, as everything has been resolved and Tech, Wrecker, and Omega are leaving, Malegi says, hey, you three, you're very loyal, that's really nice, but watch your back because loyalty doesn't go both ways all the time with Sid. And, free advice or just messing with him, I don't know, but certainly he seems to have indicated that's how he feels earlier in the episode when he had that conversation with Sid. And so I think he's probably telling them the truth, but messing with them too in a way. But that's setting the foundation for a potential later betrayal by Sid, who, if it's worth anything to you, will probably feel bad for the Bad Batch if she has to do it. But they are certainly setting up a situation where she might consider doing that. And even though she'll feel bad, she will still do it because it's going to be the right thing for her. For a sixth takeaway, and by the way, we are in spoiler territory in case I needed to give you the warning, but I had to say Tech is probably the exact right member of the Bad Batch to have done this challenge, which of course works out very well, doesn't it? I guess Hunter probably could have done as well. Maybe he could have pulled off the race, but I think Tech's additional strategic calculations during the race are things that Hunter might not necessarily have pulled off. Also, Tech, pilots their ship on a regular basis, so it's not like he doesn't have flying under his belt. And with his strategic calculations and the fact that he was analyzing the patterns of the racers and whatnot, that's not necessarily the kind of thing Hunter would do. So yeah, Tech was exactly the right person for this challenge. And, for somebody who is not a glory seeker and somebody who would not be looking at it from the rush of adrenaline standpoint or anything like that, it was actually kind of fun to see him put in that position as a character too. And to have the crowds chanting Tech, 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 and for him to realize, oh, I'm gaining acclaim. Just giving the little salute as a response for it. It's as much as he could muster. And how funny was it that the announcer for the race kept just going, Tech? That's all? This not another name, just Tech? Tech? What is this? And for a seventh and final takeaway, let's talk about the voice actors for the episode. So in a previous episode of the podcast, and actually I think we've said this a couple of times, we've talked about the fact that it's not just people who are primarily known as voice actors who are appearing in the series so far. It seems like they're also getting folks who are known for appearing in film and television to do voice roles for the series. And that is the case again with this episode. Malegi is voiced by Ernie Hudson, probably best known for Ghostbusters fame and Oz, for example. So yeah, that was very exciting. We also had Ben Schwartz, who, along with Bill Hader, did voice work for BB-8 in The Force Awakens, and he was a stormtrooper in The Force Awakens as well. I think he's best known as John Ralphio from Parks and Recreation. At least that's where I best know him. And then also Jonathan Lipow, who did a bunch of additional voices for Star Wars Resistance, and also did a previous episode of The Bad Batch as well, but Jonathan Lipow also did voices for this too. Glad to see a Resistance alum get some love. So there you go. That's what I've got for you on our 7 takeaway breakdown for Faster from Season 2 of The Bad Batch, and that is going to do it for this episode of the podcast. It just remains for me to say thank you so much for joining me for it as always, and may the Force be with you wherever in the world you may be.
Star Wars 7x7 is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox, and is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other Star Wars related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited, or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the Force be with them. All original content is copyright 2021 by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.